There are sadly many bad people who've made good movies. As you learn more about film and live on this planet for a longer time, it becomes apparent how little we know about some of our greatest heroes. And no, before you start typing, I'm not separating the art from the artist. The men I'm talking about today are horrible and indefensible, and I think some of the worst of them have been protected in ways that most people don't even comprehend. I also think ignoring these artists, and by extension ignoring their art, ignores that these atrocities can be uncovered at any moment with any artist, and then we're shocked when our favorites become villains, such as the response to the horrible abuse and plagiarism allegations from In the Mood for Love director Wong Kar-wai. And no, I don't think people have to discard some of their favorite films, but becomes far too weird when attempting to have balanced conversations, and you quickly wade into spaces where people are claiming that actually Roman Polanski was innocent, that young girl was a consenting partner, or there's nothing wrong with Woody Allen getting married to his daughter. And by having any attempt to separate the artist from the art, doing so is ignoring pain and abuse, covering up how sometimes this harm shapes the art itself, ignoring an industry plagued with misogyny and racism in its very fabric. While I still think there can be merit to the art, some of these films also unintentionally become confessions. And also at the same time, not every single questionable film with questionable content becomes a product of a questionable person. And it's important to make decisions that make you feel okay at the end of the day, but I also feel the need to say if someone says a piece of art speaks to them, it says very little about their personhood. I felt really inspired to make this video, recognizing that we exist in a world where people, especially younger people, are more afraid of doing the wrong thing than ever before, which, while important, sometimes is framed less around following your moral compass and more around the fear of being swallowed whole by the internet and being understandably unable to anticipate someone who made a film you really cared about is actually a monster, and then everyone acts like they knew all along when that's just ridiculous. And I also notice as time and time goes on, there's also an ebb and flow in how we treat these artists. There's a selective outrage. We suddenly allow ourselves to parade some of these artists with large news about their spousal and domestic abuse being more public, yet we give these men Oscars, and while I find myself disgusted, these connections run further deep than we often think. People act like they can predict the Wong Kar-wai accusations, but there's always a chance that your favorite is disgusting and you may never learn, or you may learn after their passing, including what happened with the uncovering of sexual assault allegations for Abbas Kiarostami, famed Iranian director. People act like there's an equal evil when talking about these issues, acting like there's an equal evil between a hardcore Zionist, Leonardo DiCaprio currently building a hotel in Tel Aviv, and Paul Thomas Anderson mentioning Krav Maga and licorice pizza and teaching a class in Israel several years ago, when there are clearly different shades of critique here. People boycott Tom Cruise for being a Scientologist, but ignore that so many of their other favorites are also Scientologists because they don't bother to do any basic research. We can recognize and talk about the evil of Roman Polanski and talk about the Polanski list, and while you can easily pirate his films and not support him financially, how can I truly platform a man, as some people have claimed, when he has Oscars to his name and has directly changed the fabric of the horror genre of film as a whole? Same when talking about Woody Allen and the rom-com. I may think he's an annoying creep, but Annie Hall contributed to the entirety of the romantic comedy as much as It Happened One Night, and no matter how disgusting he is, that doesn't make any of it any less true. I'd argue ignoring that actually makes you ignorant of the art form of film, and to call him a slimeball whose death I throw a parade for can be said in the same breath. Multiple truths can be true. We can be sensitive to victims and talk responsibly about these films, but there has to be a middle ground between honoring Woody Allen with a retrospective when he dies and ignoring Annie Hall was important. Watching and talking about art is not an endorsement, but certainly people can be weird about their approach. But today I want to not ignore any of it. I want to talk about the art and the artist and not separate them, but grapple with the fact that they're often so more intertwined than any of us give credit. What happens if a monster is on camera or off the camera? What happens if a monster was funding some of your favorite films? What do we do with the films that we never actually know the truth about? Can we still watch any of these favorite films? Can we even still have responsible discussion about them? Because I don't think anybody's engagement with film is consistent across the board, but I think we need to talk about this truthfully and honestly and recognize that this is a difficult subject matter and there is no perfect choice. My name is James, this is Movie Good or Movie Bad, and this is by far the most challenging and difficult video I've ever made on this page, and by far the most uncomfortable. There's a chance that a few people are very frustrated with me already or already typing away in the comments, and I'm not ignoring these men or their horrors or their atrocities. These men are awful. I think pushing the art to the side and acting like it doesn't exist often makes those atrocities even more ignored. Because I find myself getting older and I see these atrocities happening over and over and over again, and we act surprised every time it happens, but really what all has changed other than ignoring some of these artists? And this video is going to be a little bit loose in form. It is structured, but I'm going to be talking about several of these men, their atrocities, the harm that they caused, how we responded, what does it mean to be in the orbit of these men, and maybe most importantly for all of you who clicked, what do we do with any of this? What's the perfect choice? And again, I don't think there is a perfect choice, but I do think we need to recognize recognize the fact that so much of this is very, very gray. And again, we can sit in this grayness while recognizing that these men are awful, and also some of their films happen to be important or happen to be great, and we have to grapple with that, otherwise we've learned nothing. The questions here are really difficult, and the reflections are even more difficult. I also want to make this very clear. I do not endorse true crime as an industry. I hate it. I despise it. I do not like any of it. This is the closest I'm ever going to get to it in video form, and I really want to be as respectful as I can. So I need to talk about the violence that some of these women and children experience in a very honest way, and yes, that does mean there's a trigger warning just for general violence throughout this video. There really is no smooth transition here, so if you do really enjoy this video, please like, comment, share your opinions down below. I don't expect any of us to be on the same page here, and that's okay. Let's all be as respectful as we can be. And also, if you do enjoy this, please subscribe, hit that bell, and let's talk about when some of these bad people make really important films. Now, the ways that Roman Polanski and Woody Allen have been defended over the years has been shocking and appalling, especially the former, but when I pull quotes from celebrities who have spoken or defended him, it's become clear that this harm has been minimized. And forgive me, I'm going to be as mindful of language as I can to not make this, most importantly, more upsetting for people than it has to, so it does not become a video that drifts into the true crime territory or speculation and detective solving associated with it, and sadly being mindful so that this is a video that's not censored or taken down on this platform. And the disturbing truth of this all is that Roman Polanski drugged and took advantage of a 13-year-old girl, Samantha Gailey, now known as Samantha Geimer, who now questionably has contact with Polanski as a woman in her 60s and seems to have forgiven him. And look, I believe that we should listen to victims and take them seriously, and there are also people that are anonymous and independent adults who are capable of forming their own opinion. And while I'm glad Samantha Geimer is able to find peace, whether any of this is true through therapy or manufactured because of the trauma surrounding what happened, I do not believe that any of this can be excused. The atrocity of everything that took place here is so cut and dry, I actually feel insane now reading how people have talked about that. This also happened in 1977. While Repulsion and Rosemary's Baby were made before this, he also made Tess immediately after this, a film in the Criterion Collection, and there are very few repercussions at all when talking about anything that happened to this man. I mean, the man fled the United States, ended up in London, and was arrested in Zurich in 2009, and that's where we get all these signatures for the Polanski petition. And again, I feel really insane reading some of the quotes about the man himself, including something that Arnold Schwarzenegger said as governor. He said, "I think that he is a very respected person. I'm a big admirer of his work, but nevertheless, I think he should be treated like everyone else. It doesn't matter if you're a big-time movie actor, a big-time movie director, or producer." But then he also said, "And one should look into all the allegations, not only his allegations, but his allegations about the case. Was there something done wrong? Was there injustice done in the case?" Which is insane. He clearly did something awful, but this speaks to a layer that I think is often ignored in modern conversations about Polanski. He was protected by powerful men because he was a prominent director, and he was protected in such a way that the narrative around his crimes is minimized in every single decade following it. Whether we're talking about people who genuinely believe that he should be forgiven, or people who had little to no idea about the nature of his crimes, until we would address Polanski's continued membership in the Academy, which was only revoked in 2018 alongside Bill Cosby's during the height of the Me Too movement. Many, including Natalie Portman and Guillermo del Toro, have shared that they were told to sign the letter under false pretenses or severely minimizing the crimes. Others, like David Lynch's signature, feel contradictory to their work, including the fact that David Lynch spoke to the ignored violence women experience in their own homes by family members every single day. And we only learned this in recent months due to his daughter Jennifer Lynch's words that she named pushing back against this, but David Lynch believed that Polanski could be better. And then we have others who stayed in silence that I genuinely believe if Me Too never happened, many would still be working with him. Polanski is a monster, and maybe to the highest extreme of anyone in this video, and his sadistic nature shaped a number of his films, specifically Repulsion and Rosemary's Baby in this case. While the latter is considered one of the greatest horror films of all time, and released at such a significant time for the genre in the 60s alongside Psycho and The Haunting, and really do contrast against the well-known horror film of the 50s compared to those films, but I actually saw Repulsion as a feminist film. It's a movie featuring a woman fearful of the world around her and men after becoming the victim of gendered violence, and spends the majority of the film hallucinating about herself becoming the victim of more violence. At many accounts and think pieces I've read about the film, there are a number of women who felt their horrors were captured so specifically within the film, and that it was empowering regardless of the intentions of Roman Polanski, and this is a clear example of how art can mean so much to us whether the artist intended it or not. It's clear when reading Polanski's thoughts about the film, he found glee in wanting to torture women on the big screen, and knowing the type of man he was, that likely made the film more terrifying for everyone, regardless of how they interpreted the film. But I think this also maybe speaks to one of the key points I'm trying to make here, we can take away important and meaningful interpretation from art that helps us navigate the world in a positive way, regardless of how evil Roman Polanski is. Maybe in a similar vein, the same can be said about any director in their work, but let's shift our focus slightly to Woody Allen, a man who's directed over 50 films, known for revolutionizing the romantic comedy with Annie Hall, worked with a number of prominent actors over the years, including the dearly missed Diane Keaton, and I'll say this now, there is no issue with anyone watching Annie Hall in the wake of her passing. As someone who watches a lot of films, I think I often have to contend with the fact that most people just have poor analytical skills and often make the grand assumption that because the filmmaker has questionable characters or explores questionable themes, that says so much about their personhood. I think a great example of this is when talking about Ari Aster, especially after Beau is Afraid, and people naming that he's a man with intense mommy issues and is not aware of them, but guys, you need to be self-aware to make a movie like Beau is Afraid regardless if you like it or not. And also, just because he makes a character like Beau or makes a character like the sheriff in Eddington, it does not mean he's like these characters. In the case of Woody Allen, and thinking as objectively as I can about the few films of his that I've seen, I'm not shocked that many people saw this awkward, off-putting man in his films played by the director himself and could find themselves poking fun at him regardless if Woody Allen was in on the joke or not, or really understood how people perceived him as an actor. Despite this, his films are really lovely written. There's a reason he could make nearly as many films as he did, and of the quality that he did, and attracted the level of talent that he did for years. If there was any film of Allen's, though, that felt like a confession of sorts, it might be the one also coincidentally considered his most masterful by many, Manhattan, a film where, I kid you not, Woody Allen plays a 42-year-old divorced television comedy writer having a relationship with a 17-year-old high school girl. There is a lot to take in here with that, but I also think the film in its own is still a tremendous effort, even if it makes people uncomfortable, and the film's existence alone would never predict that Woody Allen would be accused of touching inappropriately his adopted daughter Dylan Farrow, and then marrying his then wife Mia Farrow's adopted daughter through another marriage, Soon Yi Previn. One of these instances is absolutely criminal. It is disputed by some of Woody Allen's children and framed as an exaggeration of conduct, and I also think we should take Dylan Farrow's accusations very seriously. In the other one of these instances, while objectively better because Soon Yi was never his daughter and he never had a relationship where they lived in the same house or that he apparently ever knew her as a minor, but it's also just really weird. It's a bizarre and strange relationship that in many ways overshadowed accusations of harm towards another child, or I guess, in this case, Soon Yi was an adult. And while I don't want to speak to the legitimacy of these claims or claims that Mia Farrow was also an abusive parent to her children or that she coerced Dylan into making the claims that she did, I think I'm more struck by reading the number of actors who worked with Woody Allen in the 90s or afterwards who didn't actually attempt to understand more about what Woody Allen was accused of. I mean, I remember in the past few years, Greta Gerwig apologized for working with Woody Allen in the 2010s. Timothy Chalamet worked with him on A Rainy Day in New York, and it was smack dab in his filmography between Call Me By Your Name and Little Women. And maybe it's just becoming clear to me how unknowledgeable and how unaware so many of these Hollywood types are about easily searchable knowledge, but I guess at the same time we see so many prominent actors choosing to still work with David O. Russell even after being accused of inappropriately touching his niece, or working with Mark Wahlberg even though he has a past history of committing a literal hate crime. And not shockingly at all, considering the fact that it wasn't until the Me Too movement began that Woody Allen faced any kind of creative pushback from the industry, it's not hard to even imagine how often other significant allegations are often ignored. I also sadly feel like we should talk about Wong Kar-wai, because disappointing was not strong enough of a word to sit through and read allegations about a man who many people consider to be the master of sensual cinema, and a man whose films are filled with such beauty, longing, and romance that people have entire vision boards with photos from Happy Together and would repost photos on social media from Chungking Express and In the Mood for Love without any context or having seen the films, or having entire photo shoots attempting to recreate the famous motorcycle scene from Fallen Angels without being aware of any of the discourse surrounding the film's new aspect ratio and color grade upon its newest Criterion Collection release. For nearly 10 years, the man had no theatrical releases outside the Grandmaster, and while not having a recent film, in 2023 he would release a 30-episode epic called Blossom Shanghai that, while not as well received as his other works, still has been highly anticipated and had so much overwhelming hype going into its American release on the Criterion Channel just before Thanksgiving of this year, and then we learned the full extent of these allegations against Wong Kar-wai, which fascinatingly largely circled in Asian and Asian American film critic circles before becoming much more widely known. What shocks people doing any kind of precursory research is that the allegations about Wong Kar-wai go back to becoming public in 2022, just when a man who went online by the name of Goy whose real name is Chang Jun Yan, saying that producers on the show took advantage of his labor and took ownership of his writing, and when he received a minor credit at the end of one episode, people brushed this all away but cautiously kept their eyes open. Soon after this, Goi-er revealed his name publicly, shared that he was a disabled man with Kennedy disease or muscular atrophy, and shared that he was removed as director and writer of the show and made to be Wong Kar-wai's assistant. He would also claim that he wrote scripts for the show over 3 years, and he was taken advantage of and bullied by the production team, including by Wong Kar-wai. This led to mostly crickets, but murmurs of conversation happen often when discussing the show, and this all escalated in September 2025 of this year, when Goi-er was able to publish voice recordings from Wong Kar-wai and credited screenwriter from the show Chin Wen, leading to his social media accounts disappearing, threats of legal action from Chin Wen and Tencent, the parent company and the production company that made Blossom Shanghai, which would then lead Goi-er to releasing a second and third batch of audio leaks on Halloween and November 8th respectively. These would feature Wong Kar-wai and Chin Wen making fun of other random Chinese actors, Chin Wen openly discussing getting away with assaulting a police officer, open admittance of taking advantage and plagiarizing scripts, bullying Goi-er because of his disability, and forcing him to cook and clean for the director. And man, it all sucks to read. It's awful. And then I learned of a few people who talked about that this was very normal for staff to be unpaid and overworked when working on a Wong Kar-wai production. I had no idea that the majority of his films also didn't have scripts, and this would often cause the cast and crew to become confused on set, and those who've spoken out about this on the Chinese internet are often called Wong Kar-wai's Victims League. There are people who've said that Leslie Chung was taken advantage of and that his story was exploited by Wong Kar-wai for Happy Together, which is often called one of the great queer films. I had a few people that tried to tell me that this wasn't a shock because Wong Kar-wai signed the Polanski letters, and I think they're just people that want to act like know-it-alls, act like everyone knows this information and is not learning all the time, and acts like we can predict this all when nobody knows that their favorites are going to be accused of something just awful. It's sad and frustrating, and while some of these allegations are about truly gossip, others are shaped by real abuse that seems to be in the background throughout Wong Kar-wai's career, and I felt the need to talk about this after reporting about this initial discovery and the fact that I had so many comments of people wondering, can I still put In the Mood for Love in my top 4? Can I still love Wong Kar-wai's films? This can all be incredibly sad, and we can still balance that out with the art that spoke so much to us at one time. It's not an either or, we can still hold it all and be respectful and supportive of someone seeking support for the abuse that they've received. Speaking of young film lovers, in the conception for this video, I saw an artist getting canceled a second time in a very shocking way. I was shocked to stumble across a group of young film lovers that were attempting to cancel Abbas Kiarostami, likely the most prominent Iranian director who's ever existed. Directed Where is the Friend's House, likely one of the most compassionate films ever to exist about children. Taste of Cherry, one of the most powerful films I've ever seen about the weight of conversation with a stranger in a lonely world. And Close Up, a mixture of documentary and fiction that is humanist in its portrayal of a man who for a time successfully impersonated one of his favorite directors of all time and the relationship they form afterwards. He's also sadly a plagiarist, taking footage from Iranian filmmaker Manaya Akbari, who also co-starred in the film 10 alongside her daughter and had her own footage spliced into the film without her permission, and also would share that she was assaulted by Kiarostami twice in her lifetime. Now, these crimes are unforgivable. There is no question at that. We cannot look at this filmmaker in the same way again. As I've said in the video before, take the steps that you feel comfortable when engaging in the art, whether you're seeking it privately and never speaking about the films, pirating these films, although because of his passing he makes no income from them, but they're also sadly interwoven into Iranian film history, whether we want this to be true or not. And also, how do we navigate this when the man passed away 10 years ago? I would never put at fault a group of young people suddenly learning of these facts and becoming adverse to watching Kiarostami's films, but what strikes me the most in these conversations, and likely the ones that we'll have again in the future, is how this knowledge was being framed as being withheld from these young film lovers. To that, I would say there have been many conversations about Kiarostami and the legitimacy of his work since his passing, and while there have been many who've attempted to delegitimize these posthumous allegations, it was taken largely seriously. People do talk about this very seriously. These conversations have already happened. Sometimes we just learn these facts and horrors much later. That's not the fault of anybody, that's just reflective of society and how they protect men who are often accused of gendered violence, but this information was also readily available anywhere online. These young people clearly found it when they began doing more research of the man. It's just fascinating to see this discovery of information being treated as it being all withheld, rather than, yeah, we've all talked about this and are grappling with it, and it makes us all very uncomfortable. It's just that we can't talk about Iranian cinema and ignore the man. As unfortunate as it is, there can be room for both in these conversations and the discovery that information is only reflective of the natural process of learning. I see people often attempting to uncover anything horrible that they might learn about a director or actor well ahead of time of engaging with a film. I think in many ways that is an unreasonable expectation, and while we should do better and while we should be better and be mindful of how we frame the art that we engage with, it's also impossible to uncover everything about anybody at a given time. Again, in the case of Kiarostami, none of this was known in his lifetime. There are many people who wrote many lovely tributes to the man who even knew him who were devastated by the discovery of this news. We don't all magically know if the art we engage with was made by a bad person. Sometimes we know of a brave person who spoke out years later, and we can be thankful for their courage and choose to reflect on that person in a different way. I often talk about Moonlight being my favorite film of all time and how the sensuality and the warmth of relationships between men, whether romantic or paternal, really took my breath away. And I also fundamentally know nothing about Barry Jenkins, and if I did learn anything, I would be heartbroken and the film would still likely be my favorite of all time, and I don't see that changing. I also think it's impossible to ask the standard where we treat every single piece of art the same. We should critique every artist harshly if we've learned that they caused harm, but we can't ignore how art affected us in the first place, and that's not separating the art from the artist, it is recognizing their relationship, and it would be disingenuous to act like if the art didn't affect you. Thinking of the past 2 years, as more people become aware of the occupation of Palestinian land by Israel and learn of decades of Zionists committing genocide, people are also coming to terms with where their boundaries lie for who they can support in Hollywood, as it is an industry of Zionists that have gone out of their way to blacklist those like Melissa Barrera who've been open and outspoken about the deaths of tens of thousands, while actors like Noah Schnapp get to pass out Zionism as sexy stickers and give a half-assed apology and then get to act like nothing happened. And it wasn't until I learned that Quentin Tarantino sat in a near-empty IMAX movie theater in Tel Aviv watching Joker 2 and howling like a hyena that I learned that Quentin Tarantino lives in Israel with his wife, who is a former IDF soldier. Now, there's a lot that people have questioned about Tarantino over the years. He's a man so incredibly comfortable using the N-word in his films in a way that is so off-putting regardless if you love or hate Pulp Fiction. He is a man who's so obnoxious about his dislike of various filmmakers and actors, including recently Paul Dano, in a way that comes across as so unprofessional as a filmmaker of his acclaim and recognition. And many have recently questioned his involvement in a car accident during the production of Kill Bill, where Uma Thurman wanted a stunt driver, was not afforded one, leading to a serious accident where she was not able to seek out any recourse towards Miramax if she were to receive the footage, leading to Uma Thurman describing herself as having went from being to a creative contributor and performer to being like a broken tool, and also having many have a grudge on Tarantino on behalf of Uma Thurman. And despite their rocky relationship over the years, Uma Thurman still speaks positively of the film and her involvement of it, and even came back to promote the Kill Bill Fortnite event at the Chinese Theater weeks ago, and also allowed her daughter Maya Hawke to star in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, who still lovingly calls Quentin Tarantino Uncle Quentin. And I also think that none of this negates the way that Quentin Tarantino speaks about Israel or Palestinians. It's just disgusting to hear him speak for any extended period of time, whether that distaste is shaped by his lack of humanity or frankly how annoying he is. Not at all similar, but there are many Hollywood stars that we've had to contend with having abhorrent beliefs about other human beings that have contributed to some of my favorite films of all time, even if the characters they play seem contradictory to their very being. One of these men is Jon Voight, an incredibly conservative man who's very MAGA, very Trump adjacent, and he's also a man who starred in one of the greatest queer films ever made, the Best Picture winner of the 60s, Midnight Cowboy, a man who's an escort moving to New York City trying to find a new place, clearly trying to run away from whatever's at home, and also recognizing that not everything is easy when coming to the Big Apple. This film is so essential for any single New York City transplant. I also think about Dennis Quaid, who starred in the extraordinarily feminist film The Substance, the body horror film that everyone loved. He played the disgusting executive, and he also starred in the film Far From Heaven, an amazing film where he plays a man in the 50s who is trying to navigate the fact that he is gay, trying to sleep around, trying to hide it from his wife, who's also discovering the fact that she is attracted to a black man at the same time. It is a film that navigates race and sexuality in such a profound way, and yet he's such a disgusting person. Sometimes these contradictions exist, sometimes this work is just a job for them, sometimes the art means nothing to the artist, and that makes this all even the more tricky. Conceiving this video, I spent a lot of time wondering about the directors, the vision makers, the auteurs who bind everything together on a set and make some of our favorite films, whether you prescribe to auteur theory or just directors being drawn to telling certain stories. But we should talk about the funding of films and how they come together, because oftentimes while I'm disgusted by a director's voice being channeled through a film, or being appalled by an actor's face being plastered on that celluloid and being projected onto the big screen or transmitted through your television, but the everyday person doesn't think about this when talking talking about who's funding your movies. Maybe the most the film community in recent years has been aware of this has been talking about Mubi taking $100 million from Sequoia Capital, a capital investment firm with ties to Israeli military tech, and a firm that only made this connection back in 2024, and Mubi only taking this money in 2025. I also can't fault the filmmakers whose films are stuck at Mubi or whom Mubi is the only one to fund their film. Jane Schoenbrunn, director of I Saw the TV Glow, has their next film being produced through Mubi before this money was ever given. Jim Jarmusch has directly spoken about the fact that Mubi has taken this money even though he is taking their money. Kit Zauer is a phenomenal director, writer, actor who just blew me away with her 2 pictures of actual people in this closeness. I appreciate her also signing letters critiquing Mubi while also needing to promote her film on the same service. It is a near impossibility for filmmakers on small budgets to receive budgets at all, and for them this is a murky and gray area. Maybe it's why so many of us are familiar with these stories of Harvey Weinstein and how difficult he was for so many, with Tom Cruise, Bong Joon-ho, and Hayao Miyazaki all sharing how unlikable the man was, and that doesn't even touch Me Too or the dozens of harassment and assault allegations underneath his name. I don't fault Martin Scorsese for having him as an executive producer on The Aviator, or Todd Haynes on Carol, or Robert Rodriguez on Spy Kids. I think producers are so far in the background, we can ignore them so much more than actors or directors. But what about when a high-profile actor is an abuser who produces so many of your favorite films? Did you know Brad Pitt was investigated by Child Protective Services in LA and the FBI for child abuse? He allegedly has had Angelina Jolie sign an NDA where she's not allowed to disclose details about the abuse, including the yelling, striking of one of the children, and strangling of one of the children. And while I'm glad that their children are still alive, and the same for Angelina Jolie, strangulation is 10 times more likely to lead to death from domestic abuse. And extremes of this violence have been ignored. The 2020 Oscars were filled with applause for Brad Pitt and many jokes and comments about his attractiveness in response to the recency of news around this violence. Earlier this year, during the release of F1, Angelica Jade Bastien wrote an article in Vulture speaking to the fact that everyone knows of this violence and no one cares. And earlier this year, I made the choice to not see F1 in theaters, and I'm apprehensive about seeing any Brad Pitt film in theaters in the future, but it's also far more difficult to manage thinking about avoiding any films made by his production company Plan B. In the past few years alone, his production company has produced Moonlight, Okja, Kajillionaire, Minari, Women Talking, Beetlejuice, Nickel Boys, Mickey 17, The Voice of Hin Rajab, and dozens of other films. And not to add any issues to a director who may not receive funding otherwise, I've also seen a director openly be disgusted by the man while also taking his money, and I don't blame anyone who's put in this situation, and you are not a bad person for seeing any of these remarkable films that may otherwise not receive funding. I just want to point out how complicated this all is. Some of you may have gotten to this point and may be frustrated or annoyed not providing clear answers or thinking that I'm excusing these men, and again, I think they're all disgusting. I think I'm just personally frustrated by this idea of disregarding the art, the creation of so many, because of one individual, even when so many find profound meaning not intended by the artist. The art never supersedes the artist, it exists in conjunction with the artist. I'm tired of people acting like they've chosen the most morally right decision, because none of that is ever clear, none of it is ever exact, none of it is ever true. I just want to point out this decision making about what you engage with or not engage with is challenging. There are no clear answers. We can't all engage with all art the same because not all art is the same. What is most important is that you're making decisions that you feel ultimately okay with at the end of the day, and also don't ignore how god-awful any of these people are. I would never pay to see a Roman Polanski film. I would be deeply disgusted if someone posted or shared a Woody Allen ranking, but I wouldn't fault anybody for seeing his films, and at the same time, I'm in the business of studying these films and reviewing them. I'm given much more leeway than most. I can't ignore Kiarostami or Wong Kar-wai's films and their effect on me or their place in Iranian or Hong Kong cinema respectively. I can also talk about how they disgust me at the same time. I can't see a film distributed by Mubi in theaters for the time being or see a film in theaters that stars Brad Pitt, but I find myself in theaters seeing films that were produced by Plan B. This all might feel like a contradiction, but I think none of this is black and white. All this is so gray. None of this is clear in discernment. If we treat this all as black and white, we ignore how these films affect us. We ignore how we learn of these atrocities over time. We act like we can predict all these allegations. We ignore film history and the entirety of how genres are formed, and we ignore this relationship between problematic filmmaker and profound art and shut our eyes from parts of the world. I don't expect everyone to have the same boundaries as me around this topic, but I also can't be surprised by the fact that so many people have so many reactions. And regardless, it feels important to say this in a world that wants us to all frame our decisions around a good or bad paradigm without recognizing how gray it all is. None of this should ever be easy. The questions and reflections are challenging, but that's part of the art. That is what it means to be confronted by challenging questions, because otherwise, I don't see people attempting to make the right choice. I see them afraid of being canceled in response to their art consumption on the internet, and trust me, some of it is bad, but my god, seeing it as black and white reduces what art is capable of, and that is the unfortunate truth. We cannot ignore some of this art because some of that art is too great, and some of these people are just awful.